You're watching Caught for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, Sunday, October 6th, 2024, around 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. A little rough this morning. We played on circus grounds the epilogue last night, and we've been playing for the last 3 or 4 days straight. Didn't quite get enough sleep. But here we are, continuing our series and continuing our October month of spooky, creepy games, although we're sticking to our normal Sunday play-by-mail Sherlock Holmes. Not so creepy here, but a good case with some very interesting story from some nice storytelling here. The case so far, a little different than our normal Dear Holmes opening letter, in that last week's letter didn't seem to present a set of facts that needed explanation, just a very gentle introduction to our story. Before we do a little recap and get started, let me check in with the chat, see how everyone is doing. YouTube says 14 concurrent viewers. We've got our regular group that joins for the Dear Holmes and Play by Mail Sunday afternoon. And then we have some overlap with those of you who join me for the late night streams. Let's do a little bookkeeping. So as I said, the last 2 days we've been playing on circus grounds, which is behind me all the way there. Deluxe Victorian era cold case game, and we had mixed experience with it. There are some parts of it that are really good. It's very well regarded. It's clearly a deluxe production, Lots of handwriting, lots of beautiful stuff. But there was some frustration at some of the puzzles. Not the worst, not the worst on this channel, but and some predictable frustration with an origami folding thing, and some that I think would be fair to say are user error. And it does segue to the topic of scheduling this month's marathon of games. I think there's something that happens when you get when you overdo it, when you get exhausted, you start to get short, and frustration triggers a little earlier than it would. And I think that came into play a little bit during our play of On Circus Grounds. Maybe there's always stuff you can find to criticize, but what hurts when you play these games and you spend a long time on them, and then you either solve it at the end and feel great, or you go and get a hint, which I hate to do, but I've been trying to force myself to do more frequently, more quickly, so that I don't spend half an hour or an hour in front of the camera just getting frustrated. But I think maybe, at least yesterday, we jumped the gun and we should have spent a little more time on the puzzle. Before On Circus Ground, we played a Deadbolt Mystery Society game, which was appropriately creepy. And before that, we played Crime Stories, maybe? Which we're going to circle back to maybe this week. Now, I did post a schedule of our October, proposed schedule for October creepy games, and I don't actually see it here on my tablet. There is a link in the... There is a link on the Board Game Guild. This is just not going to work, is it? Okay. Well, I have been showing the calendar on previous streams. I think what we scheduled for this week was Curios Jasper Park, which is this one here, the manila folder here, manila envelope. And that'll be more like a little story, I think, told through letters and stuff. So almost like a cold case, but more of a linear just reading. I think I've scheduled that for Tuesday, and then at the end of the week, the game sitting next to it, Cavendish, Time Stories Revolution Cavendish, which may or may not be spooky, but it looks like a haunted mansion. But let me know if you want to change that schedule in some way. All right, so let's talk about Dear Holmes. There's one other little thing I want to mention about Dear Holmes. When we broadcast playthroughs of some of these games, I occasionally worry that a publisher will be like, we'd rather you not do a live stream of this because you can only play this game once. If someone watches your video, maybe they won't buy the game themselves. And in general, it hasn't happened yet. There's only been one or two instances on the channel when a publisher an author was unhappy with the videos we put up, and that was Bureau of Investigation, which is behind me. But we went ahead anyway in that case. But I try to be aware of when we're stepping on toes of an author or a company. But it's particularly worrisome with Dear Holmes. And that's because it's essentially just reading a letter. And you could imagine, and it's not a cheap service, Dear Holmes, you could imagine that the producers of Dear Holmes might say, you're reading the letters on the screen. It's like reading a book. uh, on the internet. Like, that's too close to our original material. And especially if we're playing games, reading the letters right when they come out. So I try not to do them. I think one of the compromises is we don't do them right when they come out. So if you subscribe to the service, you'll get your letters a month at least before we play it, often several months. So that's one way. I want Dear Holmes to thrive. There are so few play-by-mail games out there that, and I love this genre, that I really want them to do well. Which, I don't want them to do well so well enough that I'm going to compromise any of this stuff. So I don't want to shill for it. But I am sensitive to that. So I got an email from them last week, and I was like, oh, maybe the day has come where I'm going to have to, where we're going to have an issue. Like, they're going to complain about it. But that's not what it said. It said basically, you know, we're enjoying the playthroughs. And the person said, I noticed on Reddit that you posted looking for older cases, because I've been trying to get my hands on older cases from Dear Holmes, so we have a big enough library to go through so we can play some of the older cases. And what this person said was that the company just launched, or is about to launch, a new service where you can get the older letters. So if you don't know, it's a little odd. They've been doing this for several years now, and you can only subscribe to get new letters. All of the previous year's letters aren't recycled. It's not like some of these subscription services where when you sign up, you just get the old boxes. They haven't been sending out the old letters, which is an interesting thing. And we've been thinking, why don't they release a book of all the old letters? Like, that would be very popular. They haven't released a book, but they are starting a new subscription service where you can sign up to get the old letters. It's called the Practice Club. So the landing page for that is active, but I don't know yet if they're ready to announce it. So I didn't want to announce it yet, but you will be able now to sign up. And I think if you love these play-by-mail games, or you know someone, I think the play-by-mail games are amazing gifts. Like, that would be the game, even if you watch these along with me, that would be the thing to send someone you know that likes mysteries, because it's such a low commitment. They don't have to spend an evening for 6 hours. They can get a letter once a week or so. It seems like a very fun gift to give to someone. So anyway, they did also send me a discount code. I didn't use it for myself. I guess I'm not opposed to using a discount code, I should say, but I do like to purchase these things myself. I am a paid subscriber to Dear Holmes, and I'm now a paid subscriber to this Practice Club. If you love these kinds of games, you might want to consider signing up yourself. They sent me a discount code for like $10 off. In the scheme of things, it's not much of a discount, but it doesn't matter if it's worth it to you for the experience. There is a link in this description of this video with the discount code. I don't get anything if you use it. You use it on your own. You make your own decision. Okay, let's check in with the chat and talk a little bit. Debbie says, honestly, if I think I want to buy a game, I just won't watch the playthrough or stick to the introduction. Nelson said, I'm actually thinking seriously about subscribing. This wouldn't happen if not for your channel. Well, that's the other side of the equation. Whatever people a company loses from them watching a video on YouTube instead of buying the game, they should make up several fold by people who are discovering the game through the channel, through a YouTube channel. Melissa said, I definitely pay attention and order the ones I think I'd be interested in, and then don't watch the stream until after. That's the way to go. Like, if you start watching one of these streams that I do, and you're like, this game looks really cool, and just stop watching the live stream, go play the game yourself, and when you get to the end of it, after you play the game, if you're like, I want to talk to someone about it, then you can turn back on the stream, the live stream we did, and watch and hear us talk about it. All right. I think we're caught up here. Let's talk about our current case, Brush with Death. So we learned what the title refers to at the end of our first letter. Let's do a little recap. We've got Charles Cavendish. Charles Cavendish Short, an advisor to the Prime Minister, has died unexpectedly. They're not sure if it's foul play. We can kind of assume it's going to be foul play, otherwise there wouldn't be a story about it. 2 questions Watson has proposed for us. Was Sir Charles's death due to natural causes, or did someone kill him? If so, who? And is there some foreign intrigue related to it? All right. Now, we're told the circumstances of his death, but this letter, unlike many, we've got a long, nice discussion about Watson doing chores. He went and he goes and he buys tobacco, and let's see, gets in a cab. The government has paid for his trip to this place where Sir Charles died. Let's see, goes to the, I guess they're waiting for the autopsy. He gets to the place. Let's see, we mark these up. Okay, Watson remembers who this guy is, Charles Cavendish. He's an advisor about affairs in Africa, where Watson also served, I believe, or Afghanistan Watson was in. Okay, so he gets on a train to, where is he going? Guildford. We hear he gets to the Bull's Head where Sir Charles was staying. We hear why Sir Charles was staying there, because he's an amateur painter, watercolor, and he was staying there on a little bit of vacation doing painting. Mycroft is involved because this could be some spycraft stuff going on, foreign affairs, etc. We're told actually that there are already a couple suspects. That Sir Charles ruffled some feathers while he was on this little vacation due to his brusque manner. There was a guy in the bar, a local rat catcher, who accused him of spilling a drink. Sir Charles denied he did it. And then there was a local retired army officer that they argued about politics with. And then we're told what happened to him and when. He gets into an argument. Later in the evening, he gets abdominal pains. Sounds like poison. A few hours later, coma and death. We're going to meet Mycroft at the cemetery. Pretty cool. Okay, so now the last person of interest we're told about is a Dutchman, also staying at the Bull's Head, who's come under suspicion. Why has he come under suspicion? I guess anytime you've got some sort of possible international advisors, you might suspect a foreign government would send a spy or something. But the reason that this Dutchman has caught their attention is that he's also got some experience in Africa, in the military in Africa. And we're going to hear from him. He's the one person we sort of hear an interaction with in the first letter. But before I move on, I also want to mention that the letter talks a little bit about Sir Charles's private life. He's a widower, and he's got an estranged daughter whose whereabouts are unknown. They're still trying to notify her about the death. Maybe that's going to come up. All right, so Southern Africa, that's what Sir Charles was an advisor for. An advisor, we don't know, possibly a spy, maybe just a diplomat. He gets out of his train, he gets to Watson, gets to the pub and hotel where Sir Charles stayed. He enjoys the food and the beer, and he starts thinking about the Dutchman. The man was already questioned. Watson doesn't exactly know why, but remarks that this guy, the Dutchman, is still there at the hotel. So that doesn't sound suspicious. Wouldn't he run on it? And then who does he see sitting at the hotel pub is the Dutchman. The landlord, the proprietor, points him to him, and Watson goes over to him. He introduces himself. He says, "Can I sit down?" The guy tells us, Jacob DeWitt is his name, the Dutchman. He says, what happened? Do you know anything about this Sir Charles and his death? And he tells us a very curious comment, the first real clue we get here. He says he was a painter. Everyone saw him painting. He was walking around painting, so everyone knew he was a painter. And he had these nice brushes. And he had a curious habit while he was painting. He would lick the tips of the brushes in his mouth, a little affectation or something that painters do to get the stray hairs all together at a fine tip. That's our real clue that someone has probably poisoned his brushes. Seeing that this is a habit he has, and that would also disguise time of death a little bit. And then the Dutchman says, "Well, we're both staying here. Maybe we had a drink together, some tea. Maybe that's why they suspect me or asked me about it. They still have my passport. Can you try to get it back?" Watson said, "I'll try to get it back." "Are you here for business or pleasure?" DeWitt says, "I'm a tobacco agent." In the beginning of the story, Watson had gone to the local tobacco shop, tobacconist, and bought 3 differently smelling tobaccos of different origins to challenge Holmes. Holmes has an encyclopedic knowledge of tobaccos and where they're from. And so Watson says, "Aha, I'll use this to test Jacob DeWitt." So he gets out the tobacco. He says, "Let me get your opinion on these." And Jacob DeWitt smells each of them, rubs them between his fingers. And now Watson's going to find out if this guy is just using a cover story that he's a tobacco representative, or does he really know his stuff? And sure enough, Jacob DeWitt, the Dutchman, seems to know his tobacco very well. He identifies where each of the leaves are coming from and a little bit about them. So Watson's like, "Okay, I see. You really are a tobacco company guy." And he says, "Bravo." And he says, "I'll try to get your passport back." And then he makes a little comment in Afrikaans, a dialect that only people who have been to South Africa would know. And he says, "Stem sam," which means what? What did we say it meant? I don't forget. I forget what he means. But the Dutchman's eyes widened, and he says, "Ah, I see. Okay, that's why I was questioned, because I had some experience in South Africa, know the language a little bit. Do you concur?" That's right. Okay, he says, okay, the tobacco's from a slightly different area. Do you concur? Do you concur? And then the Dutchman's like, I get it now. Okay, it's because I was in South Africa. All right. And that's where we are. That's our recap. Time for our new letter. All right. My not as prepared today as I normally am. Over the past couple weeks, we've been doing some repairs to the apartment and decided to paint the bathroom, and then spent several days getting sample colors. Decided on a sample color, removed everything from the bathroom, repainted it. I don't love it after all that. It's not that I don't love it. I miss the old color. I get attached to the old things. So I'm trying to decide what to do. I guess I'll just try to live with it for a little bit. Okay, are we ready to read our new letter today? Let's check in, see if there's any last things in the comments. Daughter is presumably the heir, so possible suspect if we can locate her. That's right. Especially if it turns out that she's in this town. Joji says, I had the idea last week that it had to be someone that knew he used to lick the brush. Jesse pointed out he painted in the open and anyone could notice that. To pursue the idea, though, perhaps one could think of where he painted, who were in the area at the time. It does sort of suggest that it might have been someone staying at the hotel. Debbie says, unless the brush is a red herring. It absolutely could be. It absolutely could be a red herring. Okay, here we go. From the Bull's Head, letterhead from the place he's staying, August 17, 1894. Okay, so the doctor is writing to him, not Watson here. My name is Dr. Clive Weaver, and I'm the deputy coroner for Worthing and have been retained by a Mr. Mycroft Holmes to assist Dr. Watson with his enquiries. Unfortunately, it appears that the date of the conference that the doctor was to attend has been moved forward a day, and as a result, he has had to hand over the reins to me whilst he hurries off to Brighton. He's given me the letter he was sent by your brother, and before he left, he appraised me in some detail of his meeting with Mr. DeWitt. I understand he sent a telegram to inform you of those events and of my involvement in continuing the investigation on your brother's behalf. I'm staying at the Bull's Head at the request of Mr. Mycroft, but I must confess I am something of a stranger to these parts. Being a coroner in Sussex, the new Watts Cemetery Chapel is only known to me by reputation and what I've read. My gratitude goes to the inn's amiable proprietor, John Pryor, who kindly offered to show me the way to the chapel. It was but 20 minutes of walking, during which Mr. Pryor regaled me with tales of his travels and the time I almost perished by sword. The proprietor, it appears, has had the opportunity to venture to many parts of Asia, especially Japan. There he proudly declared he was trained in the arts of the samurai for weeks, and learned how to properly wield a katana and how to draw, sheathe, and even strike targets with it. Training did not come easily, however, as he nearly sliced through a part of his abdomen while attempting to sheathe the blade on more than one occasion. Almost made myself into a rasher of bacon, he quipped. I'm inclined to believe you already know this, but I will add that a katana is what we would likely refer to as a Japanese sword, according to Mr. Pryor. When we reached the chapel, we stood outside chatting for some minutes until the man finished telling me of his travels. Therefore, I thanked him for his assistance, and for his part, he offered to demonstrate introductory techniques of the blade for me on my return to the Bull's Head. I politely declined, though I did note I was interested in viewing the authentic katanas he claimed to have brought back from his journeys. Having parted ways with Pryor, I proceeded to make my way around the outside of the chapel. I had read of its completion in the Times, but the article did not do justice to its grandeur. I was awed by the new, almost pink, brick, Romanesque edifice that stood before me. And the fine terracotta reliefs were splendid and, in my opinion, had a strong Egyptian influence. Passing through the ornate arched doorway, I entered into a vast circular space and was taken aback by the immensely high domed roof, which was vaulted, supported by 8 painted columns. These rose majestically, being embossed and gilded in a style reminiscent of intricate Celtic knotwork. At the very center of the building, there had been erected a trestle table upon which the corpse of Sir Charles Short had been placed, covered from the neck down by a single mortuary sheet. Alongside this was a smaller table upon which had been set out Sir Charles's personal possessions. These included all the items from his room at the Bull's Head, and a stiff paper envelope which I found contained the post-mortem and toxicology report. For several minutes I stood, brows furrowed, as I read the report. Putting this to one side, I then determined to examine the body of Sir Charles, pulling down the sheet. I could see rough, exposed stitching indicating where the incisions for the post-mortem examination of the internal organs had been carried out. I stood back for a moment, observing the posture of the corpse, before moving forward to examine it more closely. Examining the wrists, fingers, and toes of the deceased, I took it upon myself to then flex the elbows and the knees, which appeared to me to be somewhat stiffer than I might have imagined. Given the time since his death, I had assumed rigor mortis would have passed, maybe a sign of the poison. With the body now having been examined in some detail, my task as a physician was complete. I pulled up the mortuary sheet and moved to consider the personal effects laid out upon the side table. Several minutes were spent examining very closely these items, and it was Sir Charles's pocket watch that drew my attention. The pocket watch was, I noticed, a gold Waltham, stem-wound half-hunter with a leopard hallmark and a date letter N. Taking out my loupe, I examined the shield-shaped cartouche decorating the back of the watch. There I saw the inscription of 2 sets of intertwined initials, CCS and MK. Once opened, the back cover of the watch contained an inner glass frame which held a circular photograph of 3 people. A man, clearly Sir Charles, a slim woman, and a girl of perhaps 14 or 15 years. Sir Charles was dressed in a well-tailored suit, and the lady beside him was just as elegant, draped in a high-collared dress, graced by a large brooch at the neck. I presumed she was his late wife. She gazed out from the photograph with a blank, emotionless stare, though this could be said of Sir Charles as well. His expression was rather cold, perhaps a little arrogant. The child, who I took to be Annie, was well dressed, but appeared to have a slightly sorrowful, haunted expression, as a hand of each parent rested on her shoulders. Replacing the watch on the table, I proceeded with my examination of Sir Charles's painting regalia. I lifted both the heavily used wooden paint palette and the blocks of color, examining each one in turn. The box showed where his wetted brush had worn a small dimple in each colored tablet. I offered the blocks up to my nose, but there was no discernible smell from them, except perhaps that of a little gum that kept the colored pigments solid. My curiosity now satisfied, I carefully replaced these items into their cases, and with my examination complete, I left the chapel to return to the bull's head. Here I sought out a quiet corner of the bar and laid out before me the pages of the post-mortem report. I settled in, pipe in hand, to further examine the findings. Okay, no smell of a known poison. More mention of the family and the estranged daughter. Very suspicious to us. Initials, CCS and MK. All right, who's going through the post-mortem now? Blowing out a gentle plume of tobacco smoke towards the already ochre-stained ceiling, I began to gather my thoughts. It was the contents of the toxicology report that greatly concerned me, for dangerously high levels of poisonous metals, particularly cadmium, arsenic, and white lead, had been discovered. However, after seeing his well-used paint box and paint-bespattered easel at the chapel, it was clear that Sir Charles was an experienced painter. As such, he had surely been exposed to the toxicity of these paints for some considerable time and had, I would argue, built up some tolerance to them. All things that are in old paints that are slightly toxic. I then imagined myself to be presiding in a coroner's court and thought, given the evidence, what might I determine as the cause of death? The summary of the post-mortem findings leaned heavily towards something akin to plumbism or mercurialism, and with no evidence of foul play, I would expect to pronounce the verdict a verdict of death by misadventure. I did consider the possibility that Sir Charles may have been deliberately poisoned, but that would have undoubtedly been evident in the post-mortem report. Perhaps a pathologist, having already found high levels of the presumed culprits, failed to observe a smaller dose of poison. I considered this too, for even a small dose might well have been fatal to a man whose system was already impaired by the toxicity of the paint. Of course, it was just as possible that this small dose was ingested accidentally, so I could not say with certainty that he had been intentionally poisoned. There was also nothing of note amongst his belongings. When I examined them at the chapel, there was nothing amongst his effects to suggest that he had been exposed to another particularly harmful poison. I recall only the slight smell of gum binder of his paints, and that of the varnished wood of his palette. There were no other notable smells, unusual or not. Still, I was troubled. It was the manner in which the body of Sir Charles had been laid out that gnawed at me. I questioned why the body was lying in such an awkward, twisted position, for I could not imagine an undertaker deliberately arranging it so. The alignment of the limbs, and particularly the stiffness of the joints, and the curvature of the hands and feet vexed me, as I had seen something similar before, but could not quite put my finger upon it. Moving beyond my analysis of the corpse, my second task of the day was more casual, a brief meeting with DeWitt, as instructed by Dr. Watson. From what the doctor had told me of the fellow, I find it difficult to believe that DeWitt is a Boer assassin or any such thing. Of course, criminals are not my area of expertise. It was some little time after luncheon before I was able to speak with him, but the opportunity naturally arose, as predicted by Dr. Watson. I was taking afternoon tea in the bar when Jacob DeWitt entered, carrying his paints and easel. On seeing this, I called out to him and beckoned him toward my table. I held out my hand by saying, "Mr. DeWitt, I am Dr. Clive Weaver, a colleague of Dr. Watson. I'd be grateful if you would join me for a cup of tea, if that's acceptable." DeWitt smiled, put down his equipment, and was happy to accede. I sought to catch the eye of Mr. Pryor to bring us another pot, and having done so, we were soon at ease, each with a delightful cup of Darjeeling. As we sipped our tea, I asked, "Tell me, Mr. DeWitt, did you and Sir Charles have to travel far to find a suitable location from which to paint?" "No, Mr. Weaver. I interrupted. "Dr. Weaver, please." He let out a short laugh. "Apologies, yes, Dr. Weaver. We barely had to travel at all, for it seems we had both independently found an ideal viewpoint, a small patch of grass alongside a cottage, the Orchard Tea Shop, which stands on the towpath beside the river. It is well named, as looking at the orchard to the rear, it has a multitude of different trees laden with fruit. The owner seems to have a gift when it comes to plants." DeWitt paused for a moment and then continued ruefully. Over the years that I have visited England, I have acquired a taste for tea, seemingly to match that of Sir Charles. It would appear that he had taken tea there before, as he said he had observed me from the bow window of the shop. This would have been the previous day, when I sat close to the towpath with my easel. DeWitt took another sip of tea. "I do believe I have information in which you might take interest, though. On the day of his death, we sat together on the grass painting. Sir Charles used his watercolors, concentrating on the flowers of the river bank. Meanwhile, I tried to capture the essence of the flow of the river with my oils. It was after about an hour of work that our concentration was rudely interrupted by a rough-looking fellow in workman's clothes, carrying a loathsome-smelling bag on his shoulder. The man came past with 2 fox terriers. He paused by the side of Sir Charles and snorted as he looked at his painting. Sir Charles ignored the fellow until one of the dogs cocked its leg against his easel." I sat up with my eyebrows raised on hearing this, and the newly encouraged DeWitt continued. "Sir Charles was enraged. I thought he might assault the fellow, as it appears they had words on previous occasion. I had to stand and place my hand on Sir Charles's arm to restrain him. Various threats were made until the fellow stormed off, cursing and shaking his fist. 'Best pray I don't see you at the Bull's Head again,' I recalled he shouted. Sir Charles then said, visibly ruffled, but he simply settled once more to paint after telling me the man was just a dim rat catcher." DeWitt went on to say that it was around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Sir Charles paused for tea, invited me to join him in the tea shop. We entered, sat opposite each other, Sir Charles with his back to the window, us waiting to be served. At that time I noticed, gazing towards the river, the same rude fellow returning down the towpath. As he reached Sir Charles's easel and paints, I saw him stretch out his hand and rummage amongst the items in Sir Charles's paint box. He then turned slightly away from me into the sunlight before taking up a brush and then making a mark on Sir Charles's painting. This caused me to rise, but before I could utter a word, he replaced the brush and was swiftly on his way. Sir Charles looked questioningly at me. I simply replied that the rude fellow we had seen earlier had just passed by. I did not wish to cause a commotion, and so I made no mention of his actions, although I did approach the young lady who served us tea and discreetly asked about him. Whilst looking towards the retreating figure, she said with some distaste, "That's just John Hardwick, local rat catcher. He's always about causing a stir for some reason or another. We pay him no mind." Following that, we shared our pot of tea until the young lady who served us offered Sir Charles a piece of fruit cake in thanks. She seemed pleased that Sir Charles had brought her a new customer. I edged slightly forward on my chair after hearing this, asking, "And was it delicious?" DeWitt laughs. "I don't know, doctor, for I did not taste it. It looked wonderful. Lots of fruits, and this the top decorated with a generous amount of almonds. I asked if I could have some too, but I was told, unfortunately, Sir Charles has been served the last piece." Thus I settled for a delightful slice of strawberry. Thus I settled for a delightful slice of strawberry-topped Victoria sponge cake. After taking a record of all this, I inquired, "And those were the young lady's precise words?" DeWitt thought for a moment before he answered, "I am fairly certain, yes." And as he stated this, our attention was drawn to a lovely bespectacled woman calling out to Mr. DeWitt. "Hooey!" she sang, dashing over to us. "Miss Ganjay," came his response. "Haven't seen you at all lately," she said. "I trust you haven't found a better shop." They shared a laugh. Then DeWitt assured her, "Never, madame, only that I'm traveling much of late. Been in Guildford the past weeks." The two exchanged pleasantries for a moment, during which time she explained she was fetching new scales for the shop from an excellent purveyor nearby, the only place my dear Matthew will trust. They laughed again and bade each other farewell. DeWitt informed me that she was Mrs. Marissa Ganjay of Schroeder and Ganjay, his preferred tobacco emporium. Industrious woman she is. He noted, lecturer at university, sings like a breeze through the trees, and is quite handy with her knowledge of tobaccos." I smiled and nodded, and having now finished our tea, offered him my gratitude for his courtesy. DeWitt picked up his paints and easel, and with a nod in my direction left. For my part, I sat and read for a while before retiring to write this letter before dinner and then bed. I trust I have been able to present the facts as I have discovered them for myself, and I hope you may perhaps be able to provide some guidance as to how best to proceed further. Yours most faithfully, Dr. Clive Weaver. Okay, so it sounds like from the chat, it looks like that there has been some pickup on some of the important clues. Let's see what we got. Not all poisons have an obvious smell. Debbie says, rat catcher would obviously use poison. Strychnine, maybe. Debbie says, almonds might disguise the taste of certain poisons, such as cyanide, but that would surely kill him much more quickly. Joji says, perhaps it was bitter mandel on the cake. All right, so let's talk about the clues in this letter. Let me file it away while the chat is talking, and then we'll go do our normal thing and highlight any important passages. The storytelling, I'm just not the storytelling, the writing, the way the writing is done really paints a picture, if you'll excuse the pun. And it does feel very Victorian appropriate. Just the setting of the scenes, the dialogues. I just love the actual writing in this month's case. All right, let us go through these letters. Let's see what the chat says. We need something that causes muscle rigidity. Yes, that's clearly an important thing. Is this doctor is definitely suspicious of the state of the body, and it looks like it's sort of contorted and still has rigidity. So some poison that would cause that. And let's see, what else is the doctor concerned with? He's looking at the toxicology, and he notes that, well, let's see, first he's got his watch with pictures of the family and another reference to the estranged daughter, who is really getting to the top of my suspect list here. And maybe some description of family problems. Are we going to learn that Sir Charles got away with killing his wife and the daughter is getting revenge? Is that what's happening? Initials on the watch that we don't really understand, CCS and MK. Okay, let's see. So he goes to the coroner. He notices that the body's all still has some rigidity. And the toxicology report notices some toxins: cadmium, arsenic, and white lead. All toxic in larger quantities and all present in some paints, in the old paints. And he's saying, well, he's a painter. If he was going to die of one of these poisons, he would have died long ago. He's probably got some tolerance. Then he tries to imagine, well, maybe these were actually damaging him and pushed him over the edge when he got some small dose of something else, or something, one of these, more than you would think. So it doesn't sound like the toxicology is definitive about the quantities of these, but he hypothesized, well, maybe you could have died from one of these. But then, so maybe he's saying, well, there's a small quantity, but it's built up or something. And then he says the post-mortem is leaning towards plumbism or mercurialism. So I'm not sure. We might need to look these up and learn about what the symptoms of these are and what they actually are. I mean, it sounds like mercury poisoning, but you didn't find mercury, so I don't quite get that. So maybe it's something else. Natural death is what he's saying it might be. And then he's saying, well, maybe when the pathologist found cadmium, arsenic, and white lead, maybe the pathologist was like, case closed, he died from those, and so didn't further investigate some other poison. And then he remembers the stiffness, which troubles him. Okay. So then he meets with DeWitt, who tells him about the last time he saw DeWitt, I guess. I'd like to get the date, the timing a little bit better. He joins him. He says, did you have to travel far? And he says, we hardly had to travel far at all. They had found a good place to paint. I guess he's not really telling us what day this was, but he tells us the tea shop they went to, the Orchard Tea Shop. And then he says, I've acquired a taste for tea, da da da. And then he tells us a little story that as they're painting, the rat catcher comes by, who Sir Charles has previously fought with. They get into a little spat about the dog taking a piss on his easel. Okay, now we get timeline here. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They go in for tea at the tea shop. Sir Charles's back is to the window, and our guy DeWitt sees the rat catcher come back, mess with Sir Charles's paints, grab a brush, puts a mark on the painting, and then leaves. Messes with the tool. First, when he says it, you think, what is he putting poison in there? He is a rat catcher. You would have strychnine and other poisons. But then it looks like he actually was making a mark on the painting, which we don't hear about yet. And then our Dutch guy says he doesn't actually tell him what's happened. He just says the rat catcher came back. He doesn't tell him that he's marked up your stuff or rummaged through your paints. Okay, then something very suspicious happens. The lady the serving lady at this tea shop talks to him about the rat catcher, and says is happy. The young lady who served us offered Sir Charles a piece of fruitcake. She seemed pleased that Sir Charles had brought her a new customer. Is this lady the daughter? That's my main question. Is this lady the daughter? That's my suspicion. My suspicion with this story is that Sir Charles has come to this town and the daughter is here serving him food. We get asked, was it delicious? And he says, I don't know. I didn't taste it. It looked good. Lots of fruits and almonds that would disguise the almond smell of poisons, some poison. And she says, oh, sorry, we got no more. So he had to have something else. And then we say, is that exactly what she said when she said there's none left? And he says, let me think. I'm fairly certain yes. Now, why is our doctor asking if those are her exact words? Let me see. He quotes her. She says, unfortunately, Sir Charles has been served the last piece. It's a weird thing to ask if that was someone's last words. Why would that jump out to you? Okay. Then we're introduced to Miss Ganjay, the woman who runs the local tobacco shop, I guess. Okay. The pocket watch hallmark, the date stamp N, could be 1887. The letter repeats in a 25-year cycle. Okay, so I didn't know that. That's something, learning something a little bit about watches. You're saying they stamp a little letter that refers to the year. and they cycle around at the end of the alphabet. So strychnine, let's see. We need something that causes muscle rigidity. Strychnine causes muscle rigidity. Debbie says that's what I was thinking too. Quite easily available in Victorian times too, especially from rat catching. Makes sense. Winston says it does say symptoms start within 15 minutes to an hour after ingestion. Debbie says, I thought about what you're saying about the daughter, but surely Sir Charles would have recognized her. Would he? Would he have recognized her? How old is she in the photo? The girl looked about 14 or 15 years old. So he may have last seen her when she was 14 or 15. She could change her looks quite a bit. The thing that seems important for us regarding the poison, though, is timeline. Do we even know that this is the last day he was seen? If so, we do have a time. 5 o'clock, so 5 p.m. when he's had this bit of cake. Let's read back in our first letter about his last day. What was his circumstance? We are told that it happened in the evening. All right, let's look at this. Watson asked the proprietor something about the person who died. A gentleman that was staying here had been out painting, I believe, fell ill and died within hours. On the day of his death, we had taken tea together. Okay, so there's our confirmation that that actually was the day of his death. And he gets questioned about the tea. Okay, so this was the day he died. And the proprietor seems to suggest he had been out painting, fell ill, and died within hours. Which sounds about right for our timeline. They have tea around 5. He dies a couple hours later. I think that comports with our description of the rest of his death, Watson. Let's see if we can get any more timeline information. He seems to have fallen some course fellow. They got into a fight, had a discussion. The discussion occurred on the evening when Sir Charles fell ill with severe abdominal pain. These symptoms were followed within a few hours by coma and death. So he gets into an argument with some guy. On the same evening, Sir Charles fell ill. These symptoms were followed within a few hours by coma and death. Fruitcake possibly poisoned. That's why no one was offered to do it. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's the daughter, but it could just be the game offering us yet another place where he could get poisoned. Debbie says, I still find it hard to believe he wouldn't recognize his own daughter unless he'd rarely seen her as a child, which I guess is possible in those days. Rob says cyanide is the almond smelling poison, but cyanide is very quick acting, symptoms within minutes. Debbie says the timing supports strychnine rather than cyanide. Uh, is it possible? I like the explanation. I like the toxicology report here. It's sort of our explanation of why you can't really trust it. But why haven't they picked up strychnine if there was strychnine in his blood? Why wouldn't they pick up strychnine? And then he offers a possibility, like maybe the pathologist already finds these easy ones and just says, don't need to look any further than that. Maybe it's just a general test of heavy metals. The almonds in the cake could be a red herring. Like it could still be the cake that's poisoned, but the almonds on top just to give it a smell. Do we get told? Sorry, this is kind of important. They're going out painting. He's with the Dutchman. They're out painting, right? Let's read the rest of the story. Because I want to see if he says they went back to painting after they had the tea cake, or did they head back? 5 o'clock, they go for tea. Back to the window. The guy puts a mark. The woman says it's John Harvick. We get told his name. That's important. He's always about causing a stir for some reason or another. We pay him no mind. And actually, maybe this is important. If we suspect that if we suspect the daughter is this waitress, then it's relevant that this waitress seems to be a local. Right? She's speaking in vernacular. In fact, she's speaking not like an aristocrat. And she seems to be a local and know the people around here. So that doesn't sound like she's just dropped in for a week to get a new job to poison him. Okay, so then she comes, she offers a piece of fruitcake in thanks. In thanks for bringing a new customer, this guy assumes, but that's a little weird and suspicious. He tells this doctor that he didn't try it. He got the last piece. Those were the lady's words, yes. And then someone distracts him so he can't finish the story. So unfortunately, he doesn't tell us if they went back to painting afterwards, because if the rat catcher put strychnine in the paint, but Sir Charles start doesn't have a chance to do more painting, that would be very hard for him to get poisoned that way, right? And I don't, it doesn't seem like they would, right? Because 5 p.m., did they go back painting afterwards? If they didn't, then you would have no chance to uh, imbibe anything that the rat catcher put in. And it just seems very unlikely that you'd be able to consume enough. Like if the rat catcher put something in the paints, it just still seems very unlikely that at 5 p.m. someone puts some poison in your paint. How much more painting are you going to do to ingest enough poison? Perry says, could the rat catcher be the daughter's biological father? Might explain why Sir Charles possibly killed the wife. Just speculating. I think the relationships here are complex. Debbie says, if the waitress is the daughter, I'm wondering if the rat catcher is just a coincidence or involved somehow. Could be a boyfriend or something in disguise. Well, there's a problem with that theory. I mean, it's a little convoluted, but the bigger problem is that you can come up with the cover story that has you pretending to be a traveling tobacco person and you drop into some new town. But you don't create a cover story by becoming a rat catcher for 30 years. And this guy is a known rat catcher in this town for his whole life. And that's just not a cover story. A rat catcher would have been someone very low on the socioeconomic status. It wouldn't be, it's just not. Debbie says, we only have the girl's word for who he is. I don't think that's quite right. We heard that he got into an argument with that guy earlier at the bar, and he was a known rat catcher, I think. I think the townspeople know him as a rat catcher as well. It's just now we've learned his name. Here, look. This is from Watson. He's saying about the people that Sir Charles ran in with. He fell in a foul of some coarse fellow in the bar, a local rat catcher, who accused him of spilling his drink. Strongly denied by Sir Charles. So it's just not a cover story you can come up with. And Debbie says maybe the rat catcher was trying to distract him. Well, the distraction didn't work, that's for sure. His back was to the window, so I don't see how that could. I think it's just a coincidence. I think it's just a coincidence, and I think the timing is wrong. I think if this guy was trying to poison his paint, he's put the poison at the very end of the day when our guy is basically finished painting. So I don't see it. But now Sir Charles has come in for dinner, right? So Charles does go to the pub for dinner before the end of the night and gets in a fight. So there is another opportunity for him to be poisoned. We're told here that Sir Charles was seriously ill for some hours prior to his death. So he goes to the tea shop. He has tea. He has the cake. Maybe he's been poisoned then. Then he comes home, comes back to the pub, probably before doing any more painting, and he has a meal. And then he has a meal in which he's not feeling well, gets worse and worse, and then he dies into a coma a couple hours later. Trying to get the timeline. Been out painting, fell ill, died within a couple hours. He rubbed folks the wrong way. The day of his death, we had tea together. He says poisoning from paints is not a quick thing. Poisoning is just in very small amounts building up over years before death. Yeah, but I mean, I guess playing devil's advocate, if you want to say that the rat catcher killed him with strychnine in the paints, it would work something like this. The easel's outside. They go in for tea, a little break. The rat catcher comes by, rummages around, sees the paint that's been used most recently, that he can see the guy is in the middle of painting the grass, so he's been using a lot of green. He can see the green little tin is wet, so he puts a couple drops right in the green and enough concentration that the guy would only have to lick his tongue once or twice to get a fatal dose. I just don't, it doesn't seem likely. It seems more likely that they were done painting for the day to me. And it would be hard to consume enough poison in that one evening. In that one session, if they went back to painting, which I'm not even sure they did. So my money is on the waitress at the cafe. Now, I do want to address an issue. Marlene says murder is generally personal. Yeah, but we're told that we've got a good reason why this could be an international affair. Okay, but I do want to address something. Okay. So let me propose something that I think Debbie might be overlooking, or a different way to think about Debbie's concern. Debbie says, why wouldn't he recognize his daughter? His daughter's poisoned him. She's estranged. Why wouldn't he recognize her? And I said, well, if the last time you saw her when she was 15, a long time ago, maybe he doesn't recognize her. But why are we assuming he didn't recognize her? Doesn't it seem much more likely that he's trying to get back with her? He's trying to fix his estrangement with her, and that's why he's come here? Like, this is where she's retired to live. He's found her. He's trying to reconcile. She's pretending that she's reconciled. That's why she's all smiling and happy and gives him a free cake. But she's really getting her revenge. In that scenario, he does recognize her. He knows it's his estranged daughter who he's trying to fix things with. And that's why he's come here. I do think that it's not just that that's a real possibility. It's that if you don't allow that, you've got a problem. And your problem is that if he hasn't come here specifically to talk with her, in other words, if he hasn't picked this place in Guildford because he knows his daughter is there, then the problem you have is it's too big a coincidence that his daughter is there while he is, because he's only there for a couple days. How would she get a job as a waitress and know about the local neighborhood rat catcher, etc.? So if he hasn't deliberately gone to meet his daughter, then the daughter as an assassin trying to kill him doesn't make sense. How could she have gotten a job waitressing at this cafe in enough time to come kill him? So I think the only way that that waitress is the daughter who's killing him is if this is where she lives and he's popped into town and to see her. I guess, although I suppose in the realm of storytelling, we have to leave open the possibility that here's this estranged daughter and she's living her life, and one day into her shop comes the father that killed the mother and left them, abandoned them. And she's like, I'm going to take this opportunity to kill him. I guess that's possible. Debbie says, why on earth is the daughter of a government official working in a tea shop? Well, that's a good point. I do think that's a good point. Although you could imagine that he kills the mother and abandons her, and she has a rough life. Not much to go on, not many clues to go on in this story that we've picked up on, but a fun story. All right, we'll continue with letter 3 of our final letter next week before the solution. All right. I'll see some of you later this week when we play our next game, which, if we go by our current schedule, will be Curios Jasper Park, which isn't really a game, it's more of a story, but we could swap that schedule around. If you're interested in playing something else here, let me know on the Board Game Geek Guild for this channel, on the thread where we've been planning out the schedule, Halloween 2024 thread. There's a link to that, I think, in this video, maybe not in this video, but in the recent videos and on the YouTube page. And I'll see you then.